Well, on to lesson 28, the city of Babylon. I'm going to start off reading a psalm. Actually, it's Psalm 137, 1 through 6. And you imagine if you were carried off to another country by someone who had come in and taken you away from your parents. Be a sad time. This was a sad time for the children of Israel. And this psalm was prophesied even before this happened. And God had warned them that this would happen to them if they continued worshiping other gods. So let me read. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Upon the willows in the midst of it we hung our harps, for there our captors demanded of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, "Sing us one of those songs of Zion." How can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget her skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. What a sad song. Here they were being carried away into this land so different than their homeland. And you can imagine as they sat by the river Chebar, or they sat there by the Euphrates River, looking over. Yes, Babylon was pretty magnificent. It was way more magnificent than they could ever imagine of their homeland. Yet here they were, strangers in a strange land. And they had no idea whether they'd be slaves or they put to work or if they would be forced to worship other gods. And most of them young people. We'll see, and we see, like in the book of Daniel, it talks about these young men that were taken into the castle to be servants of King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's talk about this city of Babylon. Where is it? And what was it like? So let's look. We'll look into history, into archaeological evidence. The Babylonian chronicles tell a lot about what Babylon was like. And in the Bible, it also talks about, it has recorded about the children of Israel in this country that was far away from them. So let's look. We see on a map, if we look along the Euphrates River, you'll see in Mesopotamia there, it's about 45 miles away from what is now present-day Baghdad, Iraq, in the Middle East. So let's go back a long time ago, because we've already talked about Babylon. If we go back into Genesis, do you remember the Tower of Babel? Where Nimrod was trying to build this tower and say, here, this is all about us, not about God. We can do anything. And he tried to build this tower to go to heaven, and God confused their languages and divided the peoples there at that Tower of Babel. Well, that's kind of the namesake of Babylon. In fact, they feel like that Tower of Babel was right where later on Nebuchadnezzar built a big ziggurat or pyramid to his god Marduk in the midst. How sad is that? They had gone away from the true and living God. And then if we go back about over 2000 BC, as you remember, in the Ur of Chaldeans and the old Babylonian Empire, Abraham was called out of the Ur of Chaldeans, which is right in that same area. And also, if you remember the Assyrians there in Sargon, the Assyrian, had come in and conquered Babylon, and then the Babylonians had taken it back. So there was people moving in and out of this whole area, and they were all fighting over this certain area of where Babylon is. The Babylonians had many gods. They had beautiful buildings and gardens and considered themselves to be intellectual or civilized, despite that they were worshiping pagan gods. In fact, the Babylonian motto in Isaiah 47:8 says, "I am, and there is no one besides me." They were really into themselves. And kind of like we are these days when we think, oh, everything's about self-centered or, thinking about yourself first. That's what they thought, thinking about themselves, and not thinking about God or not thinking about other people, but themselves. Well, Old Babylon was a little bit different than New Babylon. The Old Babylon that was back when Abraham's time was probably 1790 to 1750 BC. They called it the land of Shinar. Old Babylon was where the Amorites and the Chaldeans settled down together there. And the sixth king of that area was named Hammurabi. He's the famous king to remember of the old Babylonian Empire. He was called the justice giver. He wrote psalms and songs for himself, hymns for himself, I should say. He was very powerful and very prominent. He united all of Mesopotamia together, and that whole area became the country or the empire of Babylon. He built canals under the city. He enlarged the walls, and he built temples. And Babylon became one of the largest cities in the world. Well, one thing noted about Hammurabi is that he made laws. He was one of the first to write the laws down. In fact, on 12 tablets, he wrote 282 laws. And this was written in cuneiform. Remember cuneiform script in the Akkadian language so that everyone could read it. And he'd put these big, huge stone pillars. They were like black steel stone, 7 feet tall, really tall in the midst, and so that everyone could read the laws. He was really proud of his laws. He hadn't really consulted. Of course, he didn't know the true and living God, so he just figured what law would be best and wrote it down and what would be the consequence. It was one of the first times that there would be consequences to certain crimes, and he'd write these down. If you did this, this is what would happen to you. And this was actually considered not so harsh at the time, but in our time we would consider it pretty harsh, some of the things. But one thing he did say is that people are innocent unless they're proven guilty, and they would have to come and bring evidence that they were innocent. He would provide laws for things like slavery, how to treat your slaves, household laws, trade and business, and even religious laws about their gods, and also laws about social status. The thing is, these laws were not equal for everyone because the lower classes were considered differently than the higher classes that lived there. So some of these laws, you listen to them. I'm going to read a couple of them. If a son hits his father, his hands will be cut off. That's pretty drastic. If you strike a person of a higher rank, you'll get whipped with 60 blows, 60 whips on your back. If a builder builds a house and it collapses, he will be put to death. That's harsh. That would be terrible. And if you charge somebody with murder and then you cannot prove it, then you will be put to death instead. If you bear false witness against someone, you will be put to death. If you rob somebody or steal something, you will be put to death. If a man has a dike and if there's water and it bursts and it floods into another's land, then his land will be taken away and given to the first. If someone is selling wine to people and these people end up becoming bad characters or doing something wrong, then the wine seller, the person that sold the wine, might be put to death too. Would be put to death, I should say. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Hammurabi code was what seemed a little bit harsh, but that's the code that they went by. Hammurabi, he thought himself to be a god, although he did build temples to Marduk, and he loved the wealth and splendor of the land. but his kingdom, his empire, was short-lived because the Hittites came in and they invaded it. And then the Kassites came from Iran and they ruled that whole area for 4 centuries. And then the Elamites came in and they ruled that area. They were from Iran. And then the last ones to come in before the second kingdom were the Assyrians. And in 800 BC, the Assyrians controlled this area. King Sennacherib in 689 BC came in and he ordered Babylon, the whole city, to be totally destroyed. That beautiful city, totally destroyed. And then he was assassinated by his own sons, and then his sons started to rebuild it. And as they started to rebuild it, Nebuchadnezzar the second was coming in. Nebuchadnezzar the first and second took over the Assyrians. Especially we know in the Battle of Carchemish that the Babylonians conquered the Assyrians. So I'm going to go on from there, but you can see this craziness of how basically the whole motto is very, very into mankind against God. They put up some false gods just for the looks of it, but they were mainly centered on their self-seeking, seeking man above God. That kind of similar today, and sometimes we think maybe we're living in a type of Babylonian empire when people are more concerned with themselves than with them knowing the true and living God. So I hope as we go through that you'll see these links, the links between way long time ago, 2000, BC, before Christ. So we're thinking thousands of years ago. Mankind hasn't changed that much. We're going to go on a little bit.